Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Ewell family. Dale Ewell was born in Ohio during the Great Depression. This challenging time in him the value of hard work and the importance of money, as he learned to appreciate every dollar he made. His family struggled financially, which likely motivated him to become determined and ambitious. Dale married Glee Michelle, a multi-talented woman, who worked as an elementary school teacher, a translator for the CIA, and served on a commission at the State Bar of California. They had 2 children, Tiffany born in 1967 and Dana in 1971. Dale's success provided the Ewell family with a comfortable life, including a home in Sunnyside, a beachfront property in Peraro Dunes, luxury cars, and designer clothing. After serving in the Air Force, Dale became a successful businessman. He eventually became the president and owner of Western Piper Sales Incorporated, a company that sold small aircraft. The primary source of the Ewell income came from selling light aircraft and investing heavily in the stock market. After establishing a successful aviation business, Dale expanded into buying several farms, accumulating substantial wealth. Together, Dale and Glee were worth an estimated $8 million, embodying the American dream. Despite their wealth, they lived modestly. Their children chose different directions in life. Tiffany pursued a similar career to her parents, whereas Dana chose a distinctly different route. At university, Dana presented himself as a successful entrepreneur, falsely claiming to be the source of his family's wealth. This fabricated story gained attention from a local newspaper and was even included in his school yearbook. In 1990, while attending Santa Clara University, Dana was fixated on wealth and luxury. He owned a BMW and had access to funds, allowing him to indulge in expensive items like jewelry. From a young age, Dana had a habit of lying and making up stories. Despite being intelligent and well-educated, Dana's ambitions went beyond comfort, wealth, and a promising future. He had the same ambitions as his father, but he didn't have the drive to achieve them in a proper and lawful way. Dana began fabricating elaborate and false stories about his accomplishments and importance while he was a student at the University of Santa Clara. He lied to both faculty and peers, claiming he was the head of a multi-million-dollar company. His false narrative included starting as a stockbroker at 18, moving to aircraft sales, and eventually becoming president of his own aircraft manufacturing company. The tension between Dana and his father, Dale, was largely unknown to others. Dana's tall tales may have caused his father embarrassment and contributed to their conflicts. Despite Dale's humble beginnings and generous support for his children, Dana seemed to have an excessive sense of entitlement. Dana Ewell presented himself as excessively self-centered and arrogant, prioritizing his wealth and social standing above all else. On Easter Sunday, April 19, 1992, the weather in Sunnyside, California was mild with partial sunshine, resulting in a pleasant afternoon. Dale, 59, spent the Easter weekend at his beach house with his 57-year-old wife, Glee, and their 24-year-old daughter, Tiffany. Glee and Tiffany returned to their home in Sunnyside by car, while Dale flew his private plane to his hangar and then drove home. When they arrived, they were ambushed. Tiffany was shot in the head and killed, followed by Glee, who was shot multiple times. The killers stayed in the house, waiting for Dale to arrive. 30 minutes later, Dale arrived home and was also fatally shot as he entered the house from the garage. 2 days later, Dana, the youngest member of the family, tried to contact his parents but was unable to reach them. Dana had spent the Easter weekend in San Francisco with his girlfriend and her father, an FBI agent. On April 21, 1992, the family's housekeeper, Juanita, arrived at the house for work and found Tiffany's body lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen. Juanita was distraught and sought help from a neighbor, who called the police. Meanwhile, Dana was still in Monterey, California. At the time of the murders, Dana was contacted by the authorities. His girlfriend's father quickly arranged for him to fly to Fresno, and Dana was visibly upset during this time. The police then started a thorough investigation, spending many days collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. The crime scene was made to look like a robbery. However, experienced detectives believed the scene was deliberately staged to make it appear as though the family had been attacked and then killed by an intruder. Upon further examination, detectives found several irregularities, including the lack of weapons, bloodstains, footprints, or DNA evidence. Instead, the detectives found that the attack was carefully planned and carried out. The attacker was a skilled shooter, missing only one shot, and had even picked up the spent bullet casings inside the house. Investigators found a box of 9mm ammunition that Dale had purchased. It was later discovered that it had been used in the murder. The home appeared to have been ransacked, but nothing valuable was missing. There was no evidence of forced entry, and the alarm, which was usually turned on, had been turned off. Investigators thoroughly examined the victims' backgrounds, searching for any clues that might be connected to their deaths. They looked into Dale's past dealings, which included selling airplanes to an individual later convicted of drug smuggling in the 1970s, and a questionable real estate transaction with Dale's brother that potentially put investors at risk of losing millions. The police thoroughly investigated and eliminated all other potential suspects with motives, ultimately they concentrating on Dana, as he was the one who would benefit the most from the tragic event. As the only surviving member of the Ewell family and the main beneficiary of the estate, Dana naturally became a person of interest. Even though he had a solid alibi, having been with his girlfriend and her FBI agent father at the time of the murders, the police couldn't shake their suspicions about him. Dana's actions did not ease the concerns of others, but rather intensified their suspicions about his involvement in the murder. Although he outwardly showed distress and even offered a $50,000 reward for the capture of the killer, his grief seemed insincere. His reaction to the horrific killing of family members seemed surprisingly subdued, as he displayed little of the shock and sorrow that people typically exhibit in response to such a traumatic event. Instead of focusing on mourning the loss of his loved ones, Dana seemed more concerned with his parents' wills and inheritance. He did something disturbing, inviting a friend to view the house while there was still obvious blood on it, demonstrating a disregard for the victims. Furthermore, he allegedly expressed contempt for the police investigation, calling the investigators dummies who would never solve the case. Dana eluded authorities for 3 years, during which time they thoroughly investigated every lead to help solve the case. The situation worsened after Dale's brothers reported Dana to the authorities, claiming he had done something wrong. According to them, Dana became furious when he heard the will being read, as he learned that he wouldn't have full access to the $8 million estate until he was in his 30s. Dana reportedly slammed his hands on the table and screamed, asking why his father could do this to him. The trust stipulated that his parents would cover his expenses until he was 25, then he would receive investment dividends until he was 30. At 30, he would have access to half of the estate, with the remaining half available at 35. Before the funeral, the Ewell brothers act to prevent Dana from reclaiming what he believes is his. However, Dana managed to obtain around $300,000 from an insurance policy. Dana's uncles actively prevented him from inheriting his father's assets, causing him significant frustration. Despite the growing scrutiny from investigators and accusations from his own family members that he was involved in the murder to gain control of the family estate, Dana showed no signs of worry. He continued to live a lavish lifestyle, showering his girlfriend Monica with expensive gifts and even helping with her education costs. However, it was unclear where his money was coming from. Investigators suspected that money was a key factor in the murders and dug deeper. They discovered that Dana had been stealing money from various sources, including his grandmother's trust account, which had held $400,000. By the time detectives stepped in, the grandmother was left with only $22,000 to cover her care at a nursing home. The discovery that Dana had been exploiting his grandmother for personal gain further strengthened the police's suspicions about his character. However, authorities still need concrete evidence to prove Dana's involvement in the murder. Joel, one of Dana's college acquaintances, was particularly drawn to Dana's stories of a wealthy, successful lifestyle. Joel found Dana's apparent ability to effortlessly attract beautiful women especially intriguing. People around were surprised by their friendship, as they seemed to have little in common. Dana was driven by a desire for higher social status, while Joel's interests lay in video games, firearms, and explosives. Despite their differences, Joel's friendship with Dana gave him the opportunity to attend fancy parties and meet attractive women. Shortly after the Ewell family murders, Joel dropped out of school and soon became Dana's roommate in the Ewell family's former home. This marked a significant development in the investigation. Both Dana and Joel started making unusual purchases, such as helicopter flying lessons, despite Joel having no apparent source of income. As a result, investigators began surveilling both, monitoring their communications through pagers and payphones. Authorities cloned Dana's pager and tapped his landline in May 1993. An officer overheard Joel discussing the investigation on a payphone, saying, "They don't have evidence, they'll try to catch you in a lie." Meanwhile, Dana continued spending lavishly, buying a new car for his girlfriend and paying her law school tuition. After using up the insurance payout, he took $400,000 from his grandmother's account, leaving her with only $22,000 for her nursing home expenses. In 1994, investigators shifted their focus to forensic analysis, which revealed that the murder weapon was a rare 9mm assault rifle made in Colorado. Records from the company showed that a rifle had been bought by Innes Jack Pond just before April 1992. Notably, Jack was a high school friend of Joel. When questioned, Jack first denied buying the rifle, then claimed he bought it as a birthday present for himself, and said the gun was later stolen. The evidence against Dana and Joel continued to mount. At one point, detectives visited Dana at his university dorm and told him they believed Joel was responsible for killing his family. Dana stayed silent, visibly pale. After the detectives departed, Dana and his girlfriend, Monica, promptly contacted Joel's brother, Radovic, but they did not realize that they were being followed by the police. On March 2, 1995, police arrested Dana, Joel, and Peter, Joel's brother, and Jack Pond. Peter had made a deal with the authorities, agreeing to testify against his younger brother and Dana in exchange for immunity. Peter confessed to the police that he had made a homemade silencer and attached it to the murder weapon. He also admitted to getting rid of the gun barrel, Joel's tennis shoes, and some gun magazines. Peter said he did these things with the help of Jack Pond. When Jack was arrested, he gave a different account of the gun. He said he bought the gun for Joel but didn't know it was going to be used for the murders. Jack also confirmed that he and Peter had disposed of evidence together. Jack received immunity in exchange for his testimony, just like Peter. As a result of statements made by Peter and Jack, the barrel of the murder weapon was found buried in a field in Rica. Unlike Peter and Jack, Dana and Joel were not offered plea deals. They were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, which made them eligible for the death penalty. The trial began in late 1997. Dana and Joel, who had previously been close friends and had even lived together in the house where the murders occurred, now had separate lawyers and took different stances during the trial. Prosecutors argued that Dana's motive for the murders was greed, claiming he had promised Joel a share of the inheritance. Dana's lawyer argued that he was innocent, suggesting that Joel and Jack had planned and carried out the murders. Joel's lawyer acknowledged the strong evidence against his client and focused on trying to save him from the death penalty. During the trial, Jack Pond testified that he had bought the murder weapon for Joel and helped dispose of it. He also said Joel had given him details of the incidents on the day of the murder, in April 1992. According to Jack, Dana had asked Joel for a favor that he found hard to refuse. Having taken steps to avoid leaving DNA evidence behind, Joel carried out Dana's plan by entering the Ewell residence. He shaved off all body hair and then waited 12 hours on a plastic sheet to minimize the risk of leaving any traces, including an eyelash. He was also instructed to retrieve all bullet casings. Tiffany was shot in the back of the head and died instantly, without seeing her killer. Glee, however, saw Joel and tried to escape to the office, but was shot and severely injured. Joel pursued her and eventually killed her. During the trial, it was revealed that Joel had shot Glee multiple times at close range, and that she had recognized him as a friend of Dana's who had visited the family a month earlier. After killing Glee, Joel reloaded his gun and put on new gloves, then waited for Dale to arrive, whom he also murdered. On May 27, 1998, after an 8-month trial, the jury delivered a finding Dana Ewell and Joel guilty on all charges. However, they could not agree on the sentencing. 2 votes saved Joel from the death penalty, while Dana escaped the death penalty by just 1 vote. In the end, both received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Dana was imprisoned at Corcoran State Prison, 50 miles south of Fresno. He was among inmates like Charles Manson. His grandmother, whom he stole from, died in 1999. Dana claims to have undergone a spiritual transformation and become a Christian while in prison. Joel was imprisoned at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Meanwhile, Jack Pond pursued a career in law, becoming an attorney. Monica Zent broke up with Dana, finished law school, and established a successful law practice. Although Monica was thoroughly investigated, no evidence connected her to the crime. The only suspicious aspects were her initial unwillingness to cooperate and that some of the funds were used to help pay for her law school expenses. Dana Ewell's actions can be summed up by 3 words: greed, entitlement, and heartlessness. His extreme desire for wealth led him to manipulate and betray those closest to him, ultimately leading to the tragic deaths of his family members. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind and loving young woman. Lindsay had a deep-seated need for connection and love. Her major misstep was that she misjudged her partner and invested herself in their toxic relationship. Lindsay was 17 when she found out she was pregnant. Growing up in a loving and supportive family, she had never expected to become a mother so young. Although she was emotionally mature, what made it even more difficult was that her boyfriend, whom she had been dating since she was 13, abandoned her as soon as he learned he was going to be a father. His sudden departure left Lindsay feeling both upset and scared. Lindsay was all too familiar with the physical and financial strains of motherhood. Her family, the Wilsons, were loving and close-knit, but they had often struggled to make ends meet. Despite their financial challenges, Lindsay's parents had always worked hard to provide for their children. When Lindsay met Mitchell, 5 months into her pregnancy, she felt like she had been given a rare gift. Mitchell, who was 20 years old at the time, was attentive, caring, and gentle. What impressed Lindsay most was that her pregnancy didn't deter him. Instead, he was eager to be involved and supportive. Mitchell told Lindsay that he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, raising her child as his own. To show his commitment, Mitchell began working overtime to ensure that Lindsay and their unborn child would not have to worry about anything. 20-year-old Mitchell was a true gentleman. He was attentive and loving to Lindsay, despite her delicate condition. In fact, Mitchell had fallen deeply in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, including raising her child as his own. At the time, Mitchell was earning a good income. However, when they announced their decision to get married, their parents were shocked. They felt that their 5-week relationship was too short to withstand the challenges and circumstances that came with marriage. Despite their concerns, Lindsay's relatives noticed a positive change in her since being with Mitchell. She had regained her cheerfulness and good health. However, some of them found Mitchell's behavior to be a bit insincere. Nevertheless, no one interfered with their decision to get married, and instead chose to keep their doubts to themselves. The wedding took place in August 1995, surrounded by a small, intimate group of family and friends, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's side was noticeably underrepresented, with only his parents, a brother, and 2 friends in attendance. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, Lindsay's relatives couldn't shake off their uneasy feelings about the union. However, Lindsay herself was over the moon, believing she had found her perfect match. As the evening wore on, their happiness was short-lived. A disagreement erupted, and the newlyweds' argument played out in front of their guests. The reason for Mitchell's outburst seemed trivial, and his reaction was disproportionately intense. The situation escalated, with Mitchell grasping Lindsay's hand and violently shaking her, leaving everyone in attendance stunned and uncomfortable. Mitchell appeared agitated and threatening, causing concern. When he calmed down, he apologized to everyone and made light of the situation, attributing his behavior to holiday stress. Although Lindsay didn't think much of the incident at the time and soon forgot about it, it was actually one of the warning signs of their toxic relationship. After getting married, Mitchell and Lindsay moved into an apartment in Southport, away from their parents. They started their life together and soon welcomed a baby girl named Robin. However, Lindsay soon discovered that her husband had a volatile temper, which cast a shadow over the joy of their new family. Mitchell's moods were unpredictable. One moment he was happy and joking, and the next, he would become aggressive and unreasonable. She thought she was maintaining a delicate balance at home, but in reality, she was giving in to his control. He dictates her every move and gets angry if she misses a phone call or doesn't pick up. Their arguments often ended with Mitchell begging for forgiveness and declaring his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had been restored, but their cycle of arguments became more and more intense. Lindsay struggled to recognize who she once loved. She frequently shared her concerns with her relatives, who urged her to leave the relationship and end her suffering. However, Lindsay found it difficult to acknowledge her mistake and admit defeat. Lindsay's relatives noticed that she often dwelled on memories of the past. Whenever her husband promised to change and return to his gentle and caring ways, Lindsay wanted to believe him and waited for him to fulfill his promises. Meanwhile, Mitchell's controlling behavior intensified. He restricted Lindsay's freedom, forbidding her from going out alone in the evenings and eventually requiring her to be accompanied by him at all times. Despite his possessiveness, Mitchell was seen with other women, sparking Lindsay's suspicions of infidelity. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her concerns, sharing an incident where a woman visited their home, unaware that Mitchell was married. This revelation led to another argument, which escalated into physical violence. Physical abuse gradually became a part of Lindsay's life. To control her and protect his reputation, Mitchell started limiting her interactions with others. He began by restricting her contact with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and eventually with her family. Lindsay, unhappy and fearful of being caught and punished, tried to secretly maintain contact with her loved ones. Despite the problems in their relationship, Lindsay stayed with Mitchell. One reason was the comfortable life he provided. He had a good income, supported her and their child, and paid the bills, leaving her without any financial worries. Lindsay's life changed dramatically when she found herself pregnant again. Although her husband, Mitchell, was a good father to her daughter from a previous relationship, she felt that having another child would be unwise in their current circumstances. She decided to have an abortion. When Mitchell found out about her decision, he became furious and verbally and physically abused her. Lindsay packed her belongings and took her daughter to her parents' home. Her family was relieved to see her. At first, Lindsay was happy to be apart from her husband, Mitchell. But over time, she started to miss him. Mitchell, eager to win her back, would call her constantly, begging her to return. Despite initial reservations, Lindsay was eventually won over by Mitchell's claims that he had changed. Everything seems to be back to normal, they are even looking forward to another child. However, their happiness was short-lived. After 6 months, Mitchell's violent temper flared up again. Although he didn't harm Lindsay, who was pregnant at the time, he unleashed his fury on their apartment. He smashed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and damaged the walls. He even threw their television out the window and vandalized their car. The landlord, fed up with the destruction, demanded that they pay for the damages and move out. The family's financial situation became even more dire. As a result, they was forced to take out a significant loan and downsize to a smaller, more modest apartment. In October 1997, Lindsay gave birth to their son, Jack. Mitchell was overjoyed at the arrival of his child. However, the relationship between the spouses continued to deteriorate over time. Mitchell often left home for extended periods, sometimes for just a few days, sometimes for an entire week, frequently citing trivial or made-up reasons. Although Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, she eventually reached her breaking point and filed for divorce, returning to her parents' home when Mitchell abandoned her once again. Lindsay realized she couldn't handle the separation from Mitchell on her own, so she reached out to a local charity that supports women in crisis. The charity helped her find affordable housing in a different city, allowing her to start fresh. However, she was worried that Mitchell would find out her new contact information, so she took steps to protect herself. When Mitchell began making threats, she took it a step further and got a restraining order from the police. With the help of a therapist, Lindsay started rebuilding her life. She kept a journal to document her experiences, intending to use it as a warning for her children in the future, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes she did. The journal entries supported what her relatives had said about the problems within the family. Unfortunately, despite her efforts to stay hidden, Mitchell eventually discovered her phone number and began calling her constantly, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, now free, soon felt lonely and couldn't resist her ex's persistence. They started talking and seeing each other again, eventually moving back in together. Ashamed of her weakness, Lindsay kept this a secret, but it eventually came out. Her relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by her reunion with he they considered a tyrant, and they couldn't understand why she had taken him back. Her relatives continued to dislike Mitchell and cut off most communication with him. Despite their efforts to help her, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. As a result, her loved ones eventually gave up trying to save her, accepting the situation and distancing themselves. This time, however, Lindsay's decision would prove to have devastating consequences. After Lindsay disclosed her situation, a social worker began monitoring the young family. However, the social worker reported that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband, Mitchell, would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. Despite the social worker's repeated requests to speak directly with Lindsay, Mitchell would make excuses and prevent her from doing so. The social worker would leave her contact information, but Lindsay never returned her calls. The social worker became concerned for Lindsay's safety and requested a welfare check. When law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, they too were unable to speak with Lindsay. Mitchell claimed that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but he did not consider her missing. Mitchell said that Lindsay participated in a party with a friend on Christmas Eve, returning home early in the morning somewhat intoxicated. This led to an argument with Mitchell. Following the argument, Lindsay packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. Mitchell claimed Lindsay had left him for another man and no longer wanted to have any contact with him. Mitchell's subsequent media appearances sparked widespread attention. He presented himself as a worried and abandoned husband, pleading for Lindsay to return. However, during these interviews, he also shared intimate details about their marriage, occasionally speaking negatively about his wife. Mitchell believes that Lindsay's actions stemmed from a desire for a lavish lifestyle. He said to have seen her driving an expensive car, which he thought was proof that she had left their children for a wealthy man. Despite her public image, Mitchell was enjoying the freedom of a single life. The search for Lindsay began with conversations with her relatives. During these conversations, it was learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th. At that time, she appeared to be in high spirits and looking well, with her behavior being normal. During their investigation, detectives were surprised that no one had expressed concern about the young wife's whereabouts for 2 months. However, they soon discovered a plausible explanation. Mitchell had a history of limiting his wife's interactions with others, even close relatives. In the past, her family had difficulty staying in touch with her due to Mitchell's controlling behavior, which made it more believable that Lindsay had intentionally kept a low profile for an extended period. The news of Lindsay's disappearance alarmed everyone, despite the initial assumption that she was not the type to be concerned about. She was known for her modest lifestyle and never drank. Additionally, her husband had restricted her from having any contact with the outside world, including friends and acquaintances. Several inconsistencies in Mitchell's statement to the police raised suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would willingly let his wife leave, and that Lindsay would not abandon her children to a controlling husband. To clarify the situation, the police conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing all of Lindsay's acquaintances and searching for anyone who may have seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned their neighbors and obtained surveillance footage from the residential complex and surrounding areas. Lindsay's disappearance was not immediately noticed, and by the time it was. However, investigators later discovered that she was last seen in person on December 15th at the local post office, where she sent several letters and postcards. Her older sister confirmed that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. During their brief conversation over tea, Lindsay handed her sister a note and asked her to read it later. Unfortunately, the sister forgot about the note in her purse and was unable to find it later, leaving its contents a mystery. As the months passed, investigators grew increasingly suspicious that she was no longer alive, given her prolonged absence and lack of contact. Although they couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient evidence, their suspicions about him intensified as they learned more about their history and relationship. Lindsay's parents and detectives suspected Mitchell was involved in her disappearance, but lacked concrete evidence. Searches at their home and nearby turned up nothing. In a televised interview, Mitchell denied any wrongdoing, even claiming Lindsay's family would eventually apologize for suspecting him. Just before the holidays, Mitchell sent a postcard and hair dye to the lead investigator. The postcard's sarcastic message mocked the detective, implying he needed confidence and to cover his gray hair. This gesture showcased Mitchell's arrogance, despite portraying himself as a victim in the media. The investigation team held an interview to clarify some aspects of the case, but they didn't reveal all the details. They suggested that Mitchell Key, a well-known family man, was not what he seemed to be. In 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal when it was discovered that he had been forging his wife's signature to claim social benefits. Although this revelation indirectly supported the theory that he was involved in Lindsay's disappearance, the investigators had trouble making progress due to Mitchell's popularity. Many people defended him, arguing that as a single father, he needed financial assistance. Despite this, the detectives were able to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was found guilty and sentenced to a month of community service. Mitchell's situation took a turn for the worse. The forged signature of his missing wife raised more than a few eyebrows, and the public's outrage grew. As the criticism mounted, Mitchell's composure began to fray, and he lashed out at the media for invading his personal life. In a groundbreaking development, a visitor to an amusement park on June 1, 2000, stumbled upon a disturbing discovery that rekindled the Lindsay disappearance case. Their dog's strange behavior near the roller coaster led to the discovery of human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Lindsay, revealing she had been the victim of a violent crime. This breakthrough shifted the investigation's focus to finding the person responsible. On June 7th, Mitchell was questioned by detectives for over 36 hours, during which time he eventually cracked under the pressure and confessed to murdering and dismembering his wife. According to his testimony, Lindsay had asked for a divorce on December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister. This request enraged Mitchell, causing him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her body in their bedroom, taking steps to conceal the smell. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, Mitchell turned to his brother Elliot, a butcher, for assistance. Although Elliot was initially hesitant, Mitchell eventually convinced him to help. While their children played in the next room, the brothers dismembered Lindsay's body and later scattered her remains throughout the city. The murderer showed no remorse or empathy during his confession. Instead, he seemed to take pride in his actions, saying that without his confession, they would never have been able to prove his guilt. He then led the authorities to the locations where he had hidden the victim's body parts. Unfortunately, her head and one hand were never found. The forensic examination confirmed that all of those of Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Mitchell brothers took place in January 2001 and was a relatively straightforward process. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist observed that Mitchell displayed classic characteristics of a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. Elliot, Mitchell's brother, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in covering up the crime. Lindsay's children were taken care of by her grandparents, who gave them their last name. 3 months after the sentence, the Wilson family faced another tragedy when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the loss, took his own life in the family's attic. In his goodbye note, he expressed his desire to reunite with Lindsay, saying he saw no point in living in a world he considered cruel. As of 2017, Mitchell Key, Lindsay's murderer, became eligible for parole, but as of January 2023, his parole requests have been denied 3 times. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sierra Jugan. Sierra Jugan was a young woman who captivated everyone with her joyful personality. Her happy and humorous nature made her the center of attention wherever she went. She had a lively, cheeky personality that brought immense happiness to those around her. Even when she made mistakes, she had a special way of making her mom smile. As Sierra entered high school, she continued to showcase her adventurous spirit. She boldly took on new experiences, including playing volleyball. Whether on or off the court, she displayed a remarkable level of comfort and confidence. On July 19, 2016, the Jen family returned from their vacation and began unpacking. Sierra was looking forward to the fall semester at the University of Tu, where she planned to study abroad. Her mom wanted to discuss her plans with her, but Sierra, being an athletic person, was eager to try out her new bike. So whenever she had the time, she was keen to take a ride. Before leaving the house, Sierra told her mom that she was heading to her boyfriend Josh's house. Her mom acknowledged her plans and told her she would see her later, around 1:05 p.m. Sierra looked cute, with her hair tied up in a ponytail, wearing shorts and a tank top as she set out on her ride. Josh, Sierra's boyfriend, called her home phone because he was worried about her whereabouts. He had tried calling her phone several times, but it kept going straight to voicemail. When Josh asked Sierra's mom if she was home, she said no. Josh told Sierra's mom that Sierra had left his house around 7 p.m., and he hadn't seen or heard from her since then. Sierra's mom knew something was wrong because Sierra always answered her phone. Her first thought was to call Sierra's grandparents who lived nearby, but they said Sierra wasn't with them. Sierra's family and Josh started searching for her, worried about her safety. Sierra's mom quickly got in her car and started driving around, looking carefully at every possible place Sierra could be, including the sides of the road. Sierra's aunt, uncle, and cousin also joined the search, thinking Sierra might have been in an accident and got hit by a car. As time went by, worry grew. The possibility of Sierra being hurt, maybe with a broken leg, weighed heavily on their minds. Despite their relentless efforts and exhaustive search, they couldn't find any trace of Sierra. When Sierra's mom got home, she immediately took to social media, reaching out to Sierra's friends, desperately hoping someone had seen or heard from her. But to her dismay, there was complete silence. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of Sierra. Filled with worry, Sierra's mom knew every minute counted and decided to call the police. Just an hour later, a concerned neighbor called Sierra's family saying County Road 6 was blocked off. With their hearts racing, Sierra's family rushed out to see what was happening. They were met by a chaotic scene surrounded by officers who refused to let them through. The officers stayed tight-lipped about Sierra, leaving her mom in a state of panic. She couldn't help but wonder if the police had found her missing daughter. The small-town police officers, seeking answers, decided to seek the FBI's assistance. They promised to deliver any information they could to Sierra's family as soon as possible. Understandably, the family found themselves unable to sleep, remaining wide awake and contemplating their next course of action. The following day, Sierra's mom and aunt took matters into their own hands, refusing to wait for answers. Her mom made a series of calls to hospitals, desperately searching for any signs of an unidentified female patient that might be Sierra. Despite call after call, they turned up nothing, leaving them feeling increasingly hopeless. A lead emerged from Detroit, Michigan, offering a glimmer of hope in the search for Sierra. A young woman, bearing a striking resemblance to her, had been admitted to a hospital with severe injuries, including numerous broken bones, after escaping from a moving vehicle with no identification. In an effort to confirm her identity, a nurse asked Sierra's family to describe any distinguishing marks on her body. Sierra's mom recalled a scar on her calf and a pierced belly button, which seemed to match the hospitalized girl's features, raising the family's hopes that they had finally found Sierra. Unfortunately, their hopes were soon dashed when they discovered that the girl in the hospital was not Sierra, leaving the family devastated and heartbroken after investing so much hope and anticipation in the possibility. Later that morning, the police visited Sierra's house to brief them on the previous night's events. One of the officers had found a trampled cornfield near where he'd parked his car and approached the area. He noticed signs of a struggle and a motorcycle track inside the cornfield. Not wanting to disturb any potential evidence, he backed away without touching anything. As he retreated, he caught a glimpse of a reflection: Sierra's purple bike. Further investigation uncovered several items at the scene: a pair of men's sunglasses, a pair of women's sunglasses, a blood-stained sock, and a screwdriver. Based on these discoveries, the police concluded that Sierra was likely abducted from that location. During the investigation, detectives thoroughly questioned Sierra's friends and family to gather information about her boyfriend Josh. They learned that Sierra and Josh had been inseparable since they were 7 years old, and their friendship developed into a romantic relationship in their first year of high school. The couple was known for their energetic and carefree nature, sharing a passion for skiing, among other things. After high school, Sierra went to the University of Toledo, while Josh enrolled at Bowling Green, But despite the physical distance, their commitment to each other remained strong. They often talked about getting married in the future, although Sierra emphasized her priority on completing her education before settling down, showcasing her academic dedication. Detectives investigating the case found that Sierra had visited Josh's house in the early afternoon on July 19th. According to the gathered information, Sierra decided to leave Josh's house and head home around 6:30 p.m. Because he was worried about her safety, Josh joined Sierra on her ride home, riding alongside her on his motorcycle. After a few miles, Sierra told Josh to turn back and go home, wanting to ride her bike alone and prove her independence. Josh reluctantly agreed, and they parted ways, with Josh heading back on his motorcycle and Sierra continuing her ride. During the investigation, detectives discovered motorcycle tracks in the nearby corn stalks, not far from Sierra's bike. This raised the question of whether these tracks belonged to Josh's motorcycle, and detectives couldn't ignore the possible connection. They began a thorough investigation to determine if there was any evidence linking Josh to the scene where Sierra went missing. As a result, detectives set up a command post to gather all relevant clues about Sierra's disappearance. A promising lead emerged quickly. A local resident came forward, saying that on July 14th, while driving, he saw a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road. He asked his son to retrieve it and put it in their truck. Later, after learning about Sierra's disappearance, he examined the helmet more closely and found red stains, which he suspected were blood. The helmet was discovered near the cornfield where Sierra's bike was found. The detectives asked Josh about his helmet, and to their relief, he produced it, confirming he had it with him. Furthermore, they verified that Josh had returned home after the interview with his parents, ruling him out as a suspect due to his solid alibi. Despite being visibly shaken, Josh was not suspected by Sierra's family in connection with her disappearance. The detectives focused on identifying the owner of a blood-stained motorcycle helmet found on the roadside. Recognizing the significance of DNA evidence, they sent the helmet to the crime lab for testing, awaiting the results with anticipation, hoping for a breakthrough in their investigation. Community unites in search for Sierra, organizing parties to scour every area for clues. Townspeople work together, fueled by a deep sense of unity, to bring her home safely. Hundreds gather at a candlelight vigil, sending thoughts and prayers for her return. 2 days after Sierra vanished, the police got a tip about a suspicious van speeding through the area where she was last seen. People thought she might have been kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking. The tipster gave the police the van's license plate number. The police interviewed the van's owner, but it turned out the van had nothing to do with Sierra's disappearance. The owner explained that he sped up because another car suddenly appeared from behind, which might have been a family member looking for Sierra, and he panicked. By the 48-hour mark, the investigation had turned up no leads on Sierra's whereabouts. As time goes on, her family is struggling to stay hopeful. With each passing day, the chances of finding her alive get smaller and smaller. Despite trying to stay positive, the harsh reality of the situation is getting harder to ignore. The police went from door to door searching for Sierra, and their investigation eventually took them to a farm near where her bike was found. The farm, which covered an acre of land, had several buildings including a small house, a trailer, and a large barn. The owner of the property was James Worley. When the police arrived at the farm, they started talking to James Worley. They asked him about the day Sierra went missing, hoping he could tell them something about her disappearance. But what James said shocked them. He told them he had been out riding his motorcycle that day, but it broke down, and he lost some things along the way, including a screwdriver and his helmet. This was surprising because those were the same items found at the scene where Sierra was taken. By saying this, James had unintentionally put himself at the scene of the crime, which made the detectives very suspicious of him and his connection to Sierra's disappearance. The police were determined to delve deeper into their investigation, and they questioned James Worley. During the questioning, they noticed something that caught their attention: scratches on his face. It was clear that he had been involved in a struggle, and this discovery only increased their suspicions about him, raising more questions. The detectives wondered if these scratches were the result of a confrontation with the missing girl, Sierra. After questioning James Worley about Sierra's disappearance, the detectives returned to the police station. They decided to conduct a background check on him, hoping to uncover relevant information as they looked into his past. But what they discovered sent chills down their spines. James Worley had a dark criminal history, including a previous attempt to abduct a young woman 26 years earlier on July 4, 1989. The woman's name was Robin Garter. On July 4, 1989, 26-year-old Robin Garter was getting ready to attend a neighborhood picnic. While her mother was busy preparing potato salad and making final arrangements for the event, Robin decided to squeeze in a bike ride beforehand. However, she had forgotten to bring water and was now struggling with the intense heat. As she considered turning back home to quench her thirst, Robin heard the sound of a car approaching from behind. Robin thought that after the vehicle passed her, she would head back home. But before she could react, the car crashed into her bike, sending her flying into a nearby ditch. She was stunned and disoriented. The driver stopped and got out, looking concerned and trying to figure out what had happened. But then things took a dark turn. The person who had hit her suddenly revealed sinister intentions. Without warning, he hit her hard on the back of the head. As she struggled to understand what was happening, the attacker held a screwdriver to her throat, threatening to kill her in a menacing tone. He ordered her to get up and get into his car right away. The man forced Robin into his car at screwdriver point, trying to handcuff her once she was inside. He managed to cuff one wrist, but Robin fought back fiercely, preventing him from cuffing the other. She screamed for help at the top of her lungs, but her cries were drowned out by the empty cornfields, with no one around to hear her. Robin's fierce resistance against her attacker left her on the brink of unconsciousness multiple times, but she refused to give up. Just as the silence was becoming unsettling, she picked up the faint sound of a motorcycle in the distance. As she strained her eyes, she saw it approaching the car where her captor was. Realizing this might be her only chance to escape, Robin waved her arms wildly to get the rider's attention. Luckily, the rider noticed her distress signals and brought the motorcycle to a stop. In a desperate bid for help, Robin explained that the man was trying to kill her. Without hesitation, she seized the opportunity and quickly climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, leaving her captor and the car behind. The motorcycle rider drove Robin home, where she collapsed. Robin's mother called the police and an ambulance, and Robin was rushed to the hospital for medical treatment. The motorcyclist, determined to help the authorities, led the police back to the scene of the incident. To their surprise, they found James Worley still present, waiting with his car. When questioned, James was fully cooperative and provided identification to prove who he was. However, his version of events differed significantly from initial assumptions. James strongly denied any intention of kidnapping Robin. According to his account, Robin was riding her bike erratically, swerving into the road, making it impossible for him to avoid hitting her. James claimed that after the accident, Robin became hysterical, and he restrained her with handcuffs not to harm her, but to secure her to the steering wheel of his truck while he sought help. He insisted his actions were driven by genuine concern for Robin's well-being. James Worley was arrested in 1989 for trying to abduct Robin. He was found guilty of abduction and sentenced to 6 to 10 years in the state prison in Mansfield, Ohio. Due to good behavior, he was released 3 years later. When Robin found out that James was released, she was terrified. The fear of James potentially striking again weighed heavily on her mind. With information about James Worley's criminal history in hand, the police obtained a search warrant and went to his home. When they arrived, they started searching the house, which James shared with his mother. At first, everything seemed normal. Next, they turned their attention to the large backyard, methodically searching the outdoor area. The officers then discovered a barn located in the corner of the yard, which sparked their curiosity. They approached the structure cautiously. Inside the barn, the police found stacks of hay bales. They searched the barn carefully, looking for any evidence that might connect James to Cece's disappearance. The detectives examined every nook and cranny, checking each bale of hay for hidden items or clues. As they removed the bales of hay from James Worley's barn, the detectives noticed a small green crate in the corner. They approached it cautiously and opened it, finding bags of underwear, stockings, and tube tops. Each item was neatly labeled and sealed in a plastic Ziploc bag. As the detectives searched through the items, they were shocked to see a pair of purple panties with what looked like bloodstains. This discovery filled them with a sense of dread, and they wondered what other disturbing things they might find in their search of James Worley's barn. The detectives quickly spotted a piece of plywood on the ground and recognized its potential importance. They carefully lifted the plywood, exposing a small freezer buried in the barn. When they opened the freezer, they were met with a strong, unpleasant smell, similar to bleach, which heightened their suspicions. As they continued their investigation, they found other disturbing objects hidden behind hay bales, including a stained air mattress that hinted at a dark history. The presence of zip ties, duct tape, handcuffs, and keys added to their concerns, as these items are commonly used in abductions and other criminal activities. The detectives decided to send all the items taken from the property for DNA testing. Worley attempted to explain the items as part of a porn business he claimed to be planning, but the evidence against him was too strong to ignore. The combination of the disturbing discoveries at the crime scene and the incriminating items led to James's arrest for Sierra's murder. Sierra's family was stunned to learn that her abductor was someone who lived far away from her home. This news sparked a million questions in her mind, with the most pressing one being where she was. The detectives launched a thorough investigation of James's property, meticulously searching every inch of it and leaving no stone unturned. They brought in cadaver dogs to help detect any potential remains. The detectives focused on a pond on the property, recognizing its potential significance. They carefully drained it to uncover any evidence hidden beneath the water's surface. They also inspected the insulation in the front of the attic. As the investigation progressed, they extended their search to the neighboring properties, considering the possibility that evidence might have been dispersed beyond James's property. They pursued leads in all directions, diligence and thoroughness guiding their efforts. A farmer was walking through his vast field when he received a call. As he walked, he noticed a peculiar area of corn that was matted down and decided to take a closer look. When he approached the spot, he saw a nearby mound of dirt, which immediately made him think it could be a grave. This worried him even more because of the recent search for Sierra. With this on his mind, he quickly called the police, telling them about his suspicions and giving them the exact location. Responding promptly to the farmer's distress call, the police arrived at the scene. They noticed a fresh pile of dirt, which fueled their suspicion that it could be a grave. Taking the situation seriously, they began processing the area carefully to avoid disturbing any potential evidence. The officers examined every inch of the scene, hoping to find clues about Sierra's whereabouts. However, despite their thorough efforts, their search yielded no results. The detectives then searched the adjoining farms for Sierra, using drones and helicopters to cover a larger area and increase their chances of locating her. During their search, they found another mound of dirt with freshly matted corn. Their trained dogs detected the scent of decomposition, suggesting a potential crime scene. As the crime scene investigators dug, they made a grim discovery. They found human remains. Based on the evidence, it was believed to be Sierra's body. Tragically, her hands were bound behind her back, and her feet were tied to the handcuffs. Further examination revealed that an object was lodged in her mouth, restricting her airway, which ultimately led to her death. Later that night, the Sierra family received a devastating call they had been fearing. The police had found Sierra's lifeless body. The news was met with an overwhelming outpouring of grief as the entire family broke down in tears. The sorrow felt by each family member was palpable, and the weight of the moment was crushing. A month after Sierra's tragic abduction and murder, James Worley was charged with 19 counts, including kidnapping and aggravated murder. 2 years later, Worley's trial began. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. Over 8 intense days, the prosecution presented a gripping story that captivated the jury and spectators alike. After deliberating for 6 hours, the jury found Worley guilty on all counts related to Sierra's murder. The severity of the crime led to Worley being sentenced to death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Buchanan family. Molly met Adam Buchanan, a divorced father of 1, when she applied for an office manager position at his company. At the time, Adam was raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. Molly, a cheerful and sociable blonde, immediately caught the attention of the company owner, and the interest was mutual. They started a romance, which turned into a serious relationship, and Molly eventually moved in with Adam. Molly, who dreamed of a loving and friendly family, made an effort to build a strong bond with her stepson Nolan. Soon, she became pregnant, and they had a son named Gavin. Those who knew the Buchanans described them as a close-knit family of 4. Adam, who owned a construction company, earned a comfortable living, and the family even purchased a vacation property in El Dorado County, California, a small cabin on 19 acres in Greenwood. The cabin was rustic with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. But Adam, being in the construction business, actively worked on remodeling it, and the family frequently visited the cabin. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township, western El Dorado County, on Highway 193 between Coloma and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found that the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property, and the cabin had burned to the ground, with charred remains in the ashes. The fire department personnel left the scene untouched. At 11 a.m., firefighters alerted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office to the fire scene, unsure of what they were dealing with. Initially, they suspected a pet might be trapped inside the house. However, upon arriving, the coroner faced a challenging situation. The house was still smoldering, making it impossible to inspect the interior. They had to wait for the flames to die down and the temperature to decrease. Once the coroner could examine the house, they detected the pungent smell of burnt flesh and soon discovered a human skull and charred torso. It became apparent that the tragedy had claimed a life. The officer called for backup, and additional officers from the sheriff's office arrived to conduct a meticulous investigation of the scene. The evidence led to an obvious conclusion: the isolated cabin, located in a remote area, was not the primary residence of its owners, but rather a vacation retreat. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the adjacent property, and running the license plates could identify the owner. It was possible that the owner was the wildfire victim. It was quickly discovered that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by Adam Buchanan. Buchanan, the owner, lived 160 miles away from the accident scene, a 3-hour drive from Bonita, California. This information supported the police's initial assumption that the house served as a country retreat for city dwellers who vacationed there to escape the hustle and bustle. It remained unclear who was inside: the company's owner, Mr. Buchanan, or someone else. The detectives began their investigation with the owner's name as their first clue. The Bonita police officer's task was to verify that all of Buchanan's family members were safe and at home. At the correct address, the officers arrived at the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. When they knocked on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage answered, looking surprised, and asked what had brought them to his doorstep. To avoid alarming the household, the officers decided to first establish who was present in the house. They didn't want to assume that the company car's disappearance was necessarily linked to the owner himself. It could have been taken by someone else from the company. Nolan Buchanan informed the officers that his father, Adam, had left for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with his partner Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were expected to return in the evening. According to Nolan, his father had entrusted him with taking care of the house. Although the remains found in the cabin were not yet confirmed to be those of the Buchanans, the information gathered and the discovery of 2 sets of remains by the evening of September 13th were enough to declare the family missing. The El Dorado County Police visited Nolan's home on September 14th to question him further and determine who had perished in the fire. However, they were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan, who explained that their son, the cabin's owner, regularly visited the property to perform his own repairs. The parents were extremely worried, having been unable to contact their son or daughter-in-law until then. The officers learned that the house relied on generators for power, but it had no electricity at the time of the incident. The presence of gas cylinders inside the cabin led to 2 possible theories. The fire could have been either an accident or intentional. By Sept 15th, investigators collected evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit, which changed the case's direction. A skull with a bullet hole was found, revealing a homicide, not an accidental fire. Forensic DNA testing showed the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull belonged to a child, making murder the primary focus. The fire was intentionally set to destroy evidence. Next, investigators sought to determine the circumstances. Burglary gone wrong, family suicide, or a grudge against Adam Buchanan of Buchanan Construction? Investigators pursued the theory that Molly's murder was a crime of passion, examining her life for enemies and her marriage for clues. As leads dried up, they focused on the troubled relationship, marked by abuse, sleeping apart, and intense arguments. Molly's mother feared they'd kill each other, yet Molly stuck with Adam, briefly fleeing with their son. The couple enjoyed hunting near home, where guns were common. Police suspected another fight escalated. One spouse shot the other, then took their own life. However, an inconsistency emerged. If the tragedy was caused by a conflict between the husband and wife, logic dictates that the instrument of the crime would be found near the remains of one of them. But this was not the case. Investigators theorized that the weapon might have been damaged in the fire, making it less conspicuous than expected. Over 5 days, forensic team members meticulously sifted through the ashes in the home, conducting a meticulous search. Despite their thoroughness, they did not find the expected result. No weapons were discovered in the house. By this time, the forensic examination results were in. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies matched Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds prior to the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the possibility of suicide. The lack of firearms suggested that a 4th person, unknown until then, was present in the house, shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start anew. Police had no option but to turn to 16-year-old Nolan, the son of the deceased. Nolan informed the officers that his family had driven away in an old Dodge truck. According to Nolan, his father chose to use the company vehicle instead of his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because the truck and trailer were already loaded with rocks to decorate the area around his country cabin. This was the truck that police found near the burned structure. When questioned about why he didn't accompany his relatives on vacation, Nolan reiterated that he had to stay behind to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. Nolan also mentioned that there was a neighbor growing illegal marijuana on the edge of the Buchanan property, which had led to frequent arguments between his father and the neighbor, with his father demanding that the neighbor stop planting it and threatening to report the issue to the police. When discussing the family business, Nolan revealed the company's financial struggles, including downsizing and a significant reduction in employees from what his father had mentioned. The business debts were accumulating rapidly. The investigation now had valuable information and a suspect, specifically a neighbor, given the common link between violent crime and illegal drug cultivation in that area. The detectives believed the threat of reporting to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. However, the issue was that they didn't know which neighbor they should focus on. After the family's murder, the financial crisis engulfing their business had to be addressed. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and questioned the employees. As Nolan had warned, the company was in dire straits, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, with debts exceeding $30,000. As a result, some employees lost their jobs. Interestingly, some of the fired employees were bitterly unhappy with their dismissal and could potentially be suspects in the crime. During a community cleanup, students found a purse with Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan's IDs and a .22 caliber rifle hidden nearby. This led detectives to a new theory. The killer used the rifle and took their documents to cover tracks. The discovery was crucial because it suggested that the killer had gone to great lengths to reach Greenwood, murder the family, and then return to Bonita to get rid of the evidence. This suggested that the killer was likely a local resident of Bonita. The fact that the evidence was found near the location of Buchanan Construction reinforced the theory that the boss was killed by a disgruntled employee. Detectives sent the gun and the bag of documents to be examined and requested a warrant to search the company's records and premises. Here, during the search, they discovered a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises, which was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. Since it was known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, the investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a white Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had initially told them. This discovery revealed that Adam had deliberately misled the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators decided to re-interview Nolan, aiming to keep him safe while gathering as much information as possible. This time, they asked him specific questions, such as what movie he had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. Unaware of the implications, Nolan mentioned that he had used his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search the Buchanan home in Bonita, search their vehicles, and examine their financial records. The Ford automobile sat in the driveway, its wheels caked with reddish soil, similar to that found in Greenwood. This suggested that the car had recently been driven on the dirt roads of Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip earlier, some soil might have remained on the wheels, but it wouldn't have been as noticeable. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed any wheel tread marks near the country house, but the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Further investigation revealed that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at a Taco Bell fast food chain on his way to Greenwood. However, Nolan claimed he stayed home and didn't accompany his parents, and that he had the credit card in his possession. Detectives reviewed the security cameras at the diner and saw what they expected: a white Ford, not a truck. When they searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that listed 4 drinks, not 3. Similarly, evidence collected at the scene of the fire pointed to 4 drink cups, indicating that Nolan had been in the car. On Saturday, September 12th, Adam and Molly used a credit card at the Valencia Club Bar in Penin, about 30 minutes from the cabin. This was a familiar spot for the couple, as they would often stop by after working on the cabin. Security cameras at the bar recorded the time they left, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track their route back to the cabin. The cameras showed that a Ford F-150, driven by Adam and Molly, headed towards the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire. Then at 3:30 a.m., the same vehicle was spotted driving in the opposite direction, but this time with only Nolan inside. Later that morning, on Sunday, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to make purchases at 3 different businesses in Bonita: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed that Adam only had 1 credit card, which contradict Nolan's previous statements. By the time the forensic results were back, Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun, leading to his arrest in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan maintained he was not guilty of the charges against him, and instead, he spun a tale claiming his father had shot the family, then pointed a rifle at him. Nolan said he took the weapon away in self-defense, accidentally shooting his father in the process. Nolan attributed his subsequent actions, including setting the house on fire, to a state of panic and extreme fear. Throughout the trial, the defense emphasized Adam's history of abuse towards Nolan and other family members. However, the medical examiner questioned the verdict due to the inconsistent angle of the bullet wound on Gavin's skull, suggesting it was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan countered that he and his brother's beds were adjacent, and they were both awakened by the noise and screaming. He claimed to have seen someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin, then pointed the rifle at him. According to Nolan, he pushed the attacker away, which would have resulted in a shot fired at around a 45 degrees angle, contradicting the forensic evidence. The prosecution's theory is that Nolan killed his brother when they were alone in the house, while their parents were out at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot and killed them as well, as evidenced by the position of the bodies. The sequence of events suggests that Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Next, Nolan took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. He then went home, met up with his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, thereby establishing an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury delivered a guilty verdict on 3 counts of first-degree murder against Nolan. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In announcing the sentence, Judge Kingsbury acknowledged the verbal and physical abuse Nolan had suffered, as well as the testimony that he killed his brother to spare him from further suffering at their father's hands. However, she also highlighted the premeditation of the crime, the subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and Nolan's plans to take over the family business, which he had shared with relatives. The judge referenced Nolan's failure to comply with rules and erratic behavior, as reported by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where he was sent following his arrest. The judge informed Nolan that he, like anyone, has the opportunity to reform, and that if he exhibits good behavior, he may be eligible for parole in 25 years. Despite this, Nolan maintains his innocence, and if he is eventually granted parole, he will be required to pay a substantial amount of compensation to the victims, the exact sum of which has not yet been determined. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kendra Hatcher. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980, in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley. Her parents divorced, and her mother later married Bruce Jimon. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Coleman Ashel Lepum, Melissa Jameson, and a brother, Neil Hatcher. Kendra grew up in Pleasant Plains, where she studied dentistry. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to Dallas and started working at Smile Zone, a dental studio. As a devout Christian, Kendra wanted to use her dental skills to help others, providing free services to disadvantaged children at the clinic. In her spare time, Kendra was involved in various activities, including teaching Bible studies and participating in volunteer programs. These programs involved building churches abroad and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. After moving to Dallas, Kendra's professional career took off rapidly. Her personal life also began to blossom when she met Dr. Ricardo Palacios through a dating app on May 24, 2015. Kendra and Ricardo shared similar values, interests, and life goals. Ricardo was completing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Despite having only been together for a few months, they were already discussing their upcoming marriage. A tragic incident in a parking lot took the life of Kendra, cutting short all their future plans. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators examined the evidence and initially suspected robbery as the motive, given that Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. They found bullet fragments and a gun magazine near her body. However, the circumstances of the shooting and the bullet wounds suggested that robbery was not the primary motive. One bullet struck Kendra in the back, while the other hit her in the head. The entry wound was at the top of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin, indicating that she had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was later confirmed when investigators obtained CCTV footage and reconstructed the events. The footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. 30 minutes later, Kendra returned home and parked in the same garage. Shortly after, a man approached her, shot her, and then ran to the side before jumping into the Jeep and driving off. Although the video quality was poor and the crime scene was not clearly visible, the authorities were unable to identify the assailant. However, they put the vehicle on a wanted list and appealed to the public for assistance. A man named Ortiz contacted the police after recognizing his car and footage related to the shooting. Ortiz claimed that, although the car belonged to him, he was not involved in the shooting and was not driving it at the time. He explained that, on the morning of September 2nd, he had lent his Jeep to two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who asked to borrow it until the evening. Later that evening, Brenda called Ortiz to meet her at a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez drove the Jeep back to Ortiz's house. When Ortiz saw his Jeep on the TV news, he confronted Brenda, who initially denied that it was his Jeep, then admitted that Crystal had used it without his knowledge. Brenda tried to persuade Ortiz not to report the incident, offering to pay to have the Jeep repainted. At first, Ortiz was hesitant to get involved with the police, fearing it might jeopardize his pending U.S. citizenship. However, he eventually decided to cooperate and provided the police with the names of Brenda and Crystal. The police then tracked the movements of the Jeep on the day of the crime and located the two women. Brenda Delgado was the first to be questioned, but she claimed to have no knowledge of Kendra Hatcher and provided an alibi, stating she was at a restaurant with Ortiz at the time of the crime and produced receipts as proof. However, as the investigation continued, the truth slowly emerged, revealing the attempts by the perpetrators to conceal their involvement. Brenda Delgado came from a modest family. Her parents, Luis and Maria, immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father worked in a factory. Brenda excelled academically and dreamed of attending medical school, but her parents couldn't afford the tuition. After high school, she continued to live with her parents, working as a dental assistant and at a spa, while still aspiring to a more affluent and beautiful life. Brenda balanced her dental assistant job with spa work, where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, she fell for Ricardo at a Jennifer Lopez concert. 3 months later, she moved in with him. Ricardo was smitten, meeting her parents, and Brenda gushed about her love in a Facebook birthday post. Brenda discovered she was pregnant, but Ricardo convinced her to have an abortion, leaving her devastated. After recovering from the ordeal, Brenda focused on her career and her beloved Ricky. She enrolled in Stanford that fall. Although it seemed like Brenda had moved on from the breakup, she was still hurting. Her obsession with Ricardo intensified, And when Ricky posted a photo with his new girlfriend, Kendra, a model-like beauty, Brenda was consumed by dark thoughts. Those close to her claimed she fantasized about harming Kendra. Investigators suspected Brenda had a strong motive to harm her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky met Kendra. Despite this, Ricardo believed he and Brenda remained friends and didn't think there was any bad blood between Brenda and Kendra. The reconstructed events revealed a disturbing picture of how manipulative and ruthless an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado concocted a sinister plan to win back her former lover, Ricardo, and eliminate Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had moved on to. Initially, Brenda posed as Ricardo's supportive friend, pretending to take an interest in his relationship with Kendra. Unbeknownst to Ricardo, she gathered information about their future plans, which he naively believed was genuine concern. After Kendra's death, Ricardo confided in Brenda via text message, pouring out his grief. Brenda feigned sympathy, offering to help him in any way possible. Unaware of her true intentions, Ricardo trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that Brenda had been secretly manipulating him for months. She had been snooping on his mail, learning about his plans with Kendra, including their travel arrangements. This discovery fueled her anger, and she became fixated on eliminating Kendra, whom she believed had usurped her place in Ricardo's life. Brenda took control of Ricardo's phone account and used it to stalk him, keeping close tabs on his activities and those of his girlfriend Kendra. This obsession soon became her sole purpose in life. Brenda's fixation on stalking eventually led her to quit her job and dedicate all her time to achieving her twisted goals. Over time, she devised a cruel and terrifying plan to murder Kendra and take her place beside Ricardo. To put her plan into action, Brenda approached several acquaintances with an offer to harm Kendra in exchange for money. She eventually found a 21-year-old single mother, Crystal Cortez, who was struggling financially and willing to assist her. Crystal recruited a perpetrator, Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Brenda paid Crystal $500 and provided her with illegal substances, which Crystal then passed on to Christopher. Several women were tasked with following Kendra to learn her daily routines and identify the best location and time to carry out the crime. On September 2, 2015, they borrowed Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher lay in wait for Kendra in the parking lot, but lost their nerve and didn't follow her home from work due to fear of getting stuck in traffic. Later that evening, they finally carried out their sinister plan and were rewarded for their efforts. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were arrested. They both denied any involvement in the crime and claimed they were not at the scene. However, when the police found the murder weapon in the car, Love's story fell apart. Meanwhile, Crystal's alibi was inconsistent and confusing. At first, she claimed she was driving in the parking lot because an armed carjacker had taken over her SUV and forced her there. She even falsely stated that her young son was with her, but surveillance cameras showed no evidence of a child. As the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, Crystal changed her story again, this time offering to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence. She implicated Brenda, claiming that she was the mastermind behind the crime and that they had been planning it for 2 weeks. According to Crystal, Brenda's obsession with winning back her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo, drove her to despise Kendra, whom she believed had taken her place. Brenda had pretended to be happy for Ricardo, but her life was actually unraveling. According to Crystal, Brenda decided to get rid of Kendra Hatcher at this point. In Crystal's testimony, she detailed how Brenda devised a plan to kill Kendra, enlisting her support. Brenda and Crystal started formulating a plan to kill Kendra, meeting several times and developing multiple plans. Initially, they planned to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then dispose of her body. However, to avoid suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around rough neighborhoods, asking people if they could help, which led them to Christopher Love, who agreed to help and participated in deciding the method of the crime. The three of them decided that shooting Kendra would be the quickest way to kill her. Crystal cooperated with authorities, revealing September 2nd wasn't a random choice. Brenda knew Kendra and Ricardo were going to Mexico, so they decided to kill Kendra before their trip. They wanted it to look like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal tracked Kendra's movements for days, noting her activities minute by minute. They traced her route home and entered the apartment complex's parking garage on September 1st, 2015, to set up the crime. Brenda and Crystal made a final check on the day of the crime. They picked up the Jeep and Christopher, dropping Brenda at the library to establish an alibi. Crystal and Christopher waited near Kendra's apartment, then followed her, losing her in traffic. They waited at her house, and when she arrived, Christopher shot her. Crystal claimed she didn't see it but heard the shot. She drove Christopher home, picked up her son, and returned the Jeep to Jose. Brenda's plan had finally come to fruition. She had eliminated her rival, and all she had to do was wait for a message from her beloved Ricardo. Brenda was thrilled to have committed the perfect crime. However, Crystal's subsequent confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about her guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. When the police arrived with the warrant, Brenda was no longer at home, having fled to Mexico using her dual citizenship. Brenda's involvement in a contract killing came to light after she fled, and on April 6, 2016, she was placed on the FBI's wanted list. With a $100,000 reward offered for information about her, she became the 9th woman to ever be listed among the most wanted fugitives, and the only woman on the list at the time. However, her freedom was short-lived, as she was apprehended just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, by Mexican authorities, who extradited her to the United States on October 6, but only on the condition that she would not face the death penalty. Brenda was charged with capital murder in the U.S. At her 2017 Texas trial, relatives of Kendra and Ricardo spoke out. Witnesses testified, confirming Brenda's intentions and obsession with her ex. Her cousin Moses revealed Brenda's depression and her attempt to hire him to hurt Kendra. Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo, said friend Jennifer Escobar. Brenda read Ricardo's emails, tracked his movements, and had his house key and bank access. She asked Jennifer to kill or disable Kendra Hatcher, offering $2,000, a car, and drugs. Jennifer refused after consulting her parents. In court, multiple people who knew Brenda testified about her obsession, and it was established that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She viewed Kendra as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, specifically reuniting with Ricky. In the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda's obsession grew increasingly intense, as corroborated by evidence presented in court. This evidence included an ATM withdrawal receipt for $500, which Brenda later gave to Crystal as payment for her role, as well as a $600 cash payment received by Christopher Love. Furthermore, cell phone records revealed that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together before the crime, with over 99 calls exchanged between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, demonstrating their frequent communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. Despite an alibi and receipts showing she was at a restaurant, the jury quickly found her guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. Delgado was sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez, who cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty, received a 35-year prison sentence with parole eligibility. The Hatcher family expressed satisfaction with the court's decision and quietly left the courtroom following the verdict. On the other hand, the Delgado family, who knew Brenda as a loving daughter and woman with strong Christian values, refused to believe she was involved until the end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street in Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags in ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all three charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with two other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to 3 other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord, who stated on November 16th, she drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotton, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom, was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing. Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with two sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with two women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blanford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28 to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her life took a drastic turn when her father passed away when she was just 10 years old. Overwhelmed by grief, her family moved to live with relatives in Whitby, United Kingdom. However, the move did not bring the peace they had hoped for, and they eventually returned to South Africa. When Carmen turned 18, she decided to leave behind with her relatives and later relocated to London to pursue her education. She earned a master's degree in marketing and quickly became known for her charismatic and outgoing personality. Carmen formed strong bonds with many people and became a loyal friend and companion. However, living in a big city like London came with its expenses, and Carmen had to work hard to maintain a decent standard of living. By day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and by night, she worked part-time at a gentleman's club. Although her career choices may have raised eyebrows, Carmen was a woman of principle and never compromised her values. She conducted herself with dignity and earned the respect of her clients. It was during her time at the club that she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Brad was born in April 1978 in New Zealand to parents who separated when he was just 9 years old. He stayed with his mother and later moved to Australia. Brad graduated from university in 2001 with a degree in construction engineering. He was then offered a job as a chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK by a prominent construction company. To navigate the complex's high-stakes negotiations and enhance his professional status, Brad sought the services of a gentleman's agency, where he met Carmen. She was intelligent, tall, and beautiful, with striking dark eyes and black hair. However, Brad's demanding career and ambitious nature left him little time for a serious relationship. Despite this, Brad and Carmen got along well after a dinner, and their casual interactions eventually blossomed into a solid friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened into a romance, and they began living together. Their relationship was built on mutual trust, care, and support. When Carmen got pregnant, Brad decided it would be better to go back to New Zealand, a country with cleaner air and a more laid-back lifestyle. In March 2005, they returned to Auckland. After the birth of their son Jack, they experienced immense happiness. They prioritized Jack's safety and well-being, making sure he had everything he needed for a happy childhood. However, the arrival of their son brought significant challenges to their relationship. The first problems arose in the relationship between Carmen and Brad due to disagreements on how to raise their child, causing tension and instability. After 3 years, they decided to go their separate ways, but shared joint custody of their son, Jack. The breakup was challenging for both, but they made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for Jack's sake. Carmen and Jack eventually moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. With time, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started a new life without Brad. In 2008, she and her son relocated to a house on a street near Brad's, so Jack could be close to his father. Having lost her own father at a young age, Carmen wanted to ensure Jack always had a father figure in his life. Despite her decision to live near Brad, Carmen's friends and family believed she and Brad still had a good friendship, but in reality, they only spent time together when it was related to Jack. As time passed, life continued for Carmen. After parting ways, Carmen and Brad each attempted to move on. Brad resumed his career as a construction engineer and, in May 2009, began a new relationship, which ultimately led to an engagement. Meanwhile, Carmen devoted herself to raising their son and, much to Brad's dismay, returned to her work at a gentleman's club. This choice troubled Brad. Carmen repeatedly presented Brad with ultimatums, but he dismissed her requests, focusing on his impending marriage and plans for fatherhood once again. This marked the beginning of adjustments to his financial commitments, specifically affecting the alimony payments for the maintenance of their son, Jack, which Brad made in accordance with their agreement. However, Carmen viewed the financial constraints as a catalyst in an escalating series of conflicts. Tensions escalated until March 19, 2010, when a domestic violence incident occurred. Police responded to a neighbor's call about a dispute and mediated the situation. As a result, Carmen received a formal warning from law enforcement. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to discuss a new school for Jack and to sign a written agreement for child support. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and asked Brad to leave, yelling that Jack was not his son as he departed. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to contact Carmen again, but she did not respond. On July 13, 2010, Brad reported Carmen missing to the police, who began searching for her. Through video footage and interviews with neighbors, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance. They discovered that on June 29, a surveillance camera at a nearby supermarket had captured footage of Carmen, providing a potential lead in the search. During their investigation of the rented house where Carmen and Jack lived, police noticed that there was no outdoor garbage can. Inside the house, they found bloodstains on the front door, washing machine, sink, and shower. To confirm the presence of blood, forensic scientists used luminol, a substance that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of blood on the bathroom door and floor. The landlord reported that on June 29, she heard loud screaming, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. When she knocked on Carmen's door, no one answered. She looked out the window and saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack, which caught her attention. She called her husband, but before he arrived, Brad walked out of the house, carrying soiled clothes. He told the landlord that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, The landlord noticed that Brad appeared to have just taken a shower. She had no reason to doubt his story, so she didn't call the police. The search for Carmen continued, and her cell phone activity caught the police's attention. Although messages were being sent from her phone regularly, the tone and language used were unusual and didn't match her previous communication style. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found, and in the back seat, they discovered her luggage, clothes, and other personal belongings. The police investigation into Carmen's disappearance began with the examination of her seized suitcase, which revealed traces of blood and a note indicating she owed money to her employer. An envelope with Misty's name and $270 was also found in the glove compartment. Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after finding blood in the car and launched a search for Carmen's body in the countryside southeast of Auckland, but it was inconclusive. As the investigation continued, police analyzed Carmen's and Brad's phones, discovering they had been in close proximity to each other during the search. However, Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had disappeared from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen vanished. A neighbor reported seeing the can being taken away through her window. Police suspected the trash can might have been used to dispose of evidence. When EE examined Brad's phone records and bank card details, then they found that on June 30th, Brad had purchased a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and several garbage bags, which raised suspicions. By studying Brad's daily routine, police identified some unusual events, including a day when he arrived early at the construction site and walked alone around the property for an extended period. While it was not unusual for a supervisor to be on site early, the police found it noteworthy. After gathering evidence, including Carmen's cell phone and suspicious purchases, they began to suspect Brad of murder. They believed Brad had killed his former lover, Carmen Thomas, by hitting her multiple times in the head and then carefully hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to obstruct justice. Brad's second son was born while he was in custody, causing him to become emotional and resentful. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators the location of Carmen's body. It turned out that Brad had attempted to create an alibi by making it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never returned. However, under questioning, he eventually detailed the events of the day Carmen was killed, revealing that his plan had not been as perfect as he thought. Brad admitted that Carmen and Brad had a heated argument, which ended with Carmen telling Brad that Jack was not his son. In a fit of rage, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house. However, he returned 5 minutes later, grabbed a baseball bat, and brutally attacked Carmen, striking her in the head with such force that she fell unconscious, bleeding profusely. Despite realizing the gravity of his actions, Brad continued to assault Carmen, throwing several punches. Memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but his anger and resentment consumed him. Brad knew his life would never be the same after this moment, and he could never undo the damage. Nevertheless, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, believing that he had solved his problem and ensured that Jack was now his alone. Brad regained his composure, took a shower, and quietly left Carmen's house. In the following days, he devised a plan to dispose of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. He met his friend outside a supermarket and asked him to buy black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning products, hoping to avoid raising suspicion. Brad then returned to the apartment, meticulously cleaned up the bloodstains, wrapped Carmen's body in a bag, and disposed of it in a trash can. After killing Carmen, Brad dismembered her body into 8 pieces to make it easier to dispose of. He cut off her legs at the hip joints and then cut each leg in half at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. A few days later, on July 3rd, Brad met a friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He confessed to his friend that he had killed Carmen during an argument and asked for help disposing of her body. However, his friend refused to provide a boat to dump the remains into the sea. Over the next few days, Brad drove to Ware Ridge in West Auckland and buried the dismembered body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He left a suitcase of clothes and some of her personal belongings in the car to make it seem like she had left voluntarily. However, he made a critical mistake by including bloody clothes in the suitcase. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Brad started sending text messages from Carmen's cell phone to her friends, pretending to be her. He claimed that she was not feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. However, this plan ultimately backfired on him. On October 1st, police excavated the burial site indicated by Brad and found the body of Carmen Thomas. Her remains were discovered in plastic containers, carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Ware Ridge. An autopsy revealed that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family on October 13th. Tragically, her young son Jack, who had been waiting and hoping to see his mother again, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, Brad Callahan's first court hearing was held. Judge Winning determined that the crime was unintentional and took into account Brad's claim that he acted impulsively in a state of rage. However, the judge was more severe in his assessment of the subsequent cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A retrial was held on November 25, 2011, where police officers filled the High Court in Auckland. In a surprise move, Brad Callahan made 2 guilty pleas, admitting to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. A judge has sentenced 31-year-old Brad Callahan to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas. Brad was also given a 6-year sentence for attempting to interfere with the investigation into Thomas's death. The judge considered this one of the most serious cases of attempted interference with justice, describing Brad's actions as extremely serious. During the trial at Auckland High Court, the judge criticized the brutality of Thomas's murder, but decided not to impose the harshest possible sentence. The courtroom was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venin condemned Brad's attempts to cover up his crime, which involved considerable effort and deception. The 6-year sentence for interfering with the investigation will be served at the same time as the life sentence. In a statement, the Thomas family expressed their ongoing anger and grief, saying that no punishment can bring their daughter back. However, they are relieved that Brad will be in prison for a long time, giving him the opportunity to reflect on the harm he has caused. Little boy Jack Brad is living with his grandmother in another town under an assumed name. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Agnes Klavina. Agnes Klavina was born on July 8, 1984, in Riga, the capital of Latvia. She grew up in a typical family with her parents and older sister, Greta. They sisters were extremely close, with only a couple of years between them. Their parents worked hard to provide them with a good education and support their dreams. Agnes was a lively and outgoing young girl who excelled in school, enjoyed sports, and had many friends. Her dream was to pursue a career in tourism or entertainment, as she loved to travel and was skilled at organizing fun leisure activities. Her bright personality and attractive appearance also drew attention from men, who frequently complimented her. From a young age, Agnes had many admirers vying for her attention. After completing her education, Agnes worked in the service industry while taking language courses and studying to become a tourism manager. At 20, she decided to leave her hometown in Latvia and move to London, seeking greater opportunities to develop her skills and talents. Her parents and older sister supported her decision, and soon after her move, Agnes met Michael Mills, a successful businessman 8 years her senior. He was well-educated, owned a thriving business, and had recently opened a movie theater and entertainment complex. Agnes and Michael quickly connected and started dating. He showered her with attention, gifts, and luxury travel. They made ambitious plans for their future together, and their love seemed destined to last. Agnes's friends and family remember this as her first true love. She radiated happiness beside Michael and envisioned a future as his wife. In 2014, Agnes received a 3-month contract as an administrator at a popular nightclub in Marbella, Spain. This opportunity required her to temporarily relocate, but she was eager to take on the challenge. Michael, unable to leave his life behind, supported her decision to sign the contract. For Agnes, this was a chance to gain valuable experience and potentially launch a new career path. Marbella, a renowned resort on the Mediterranean coast, attracts vacationers from around the world, particularly the wealthy. It's not uncommon to spot celebrities, athletes, and business leaders in the area. Kavina, being a sociable person, enjoyed working in such a vibrant environment. Before relocating, she visited her family in Latvia and shared the news of her 3-month employment contract. She also announced her plans to marry Michael upon her return to England. Her family was thrilled for Agnes and wished her well. In May 2014, Agnes packed lightly and moved to Spain for the season, while Michael remained in London. They stayed in touch through daily phone calls and video chats, sharing updates about their lives. Agnes was active on social media, posting daily updates, photos, and videos, which drew a large following interested in her life and work. Agnes had a vibrant and busy life, making the most of every day. After her employment contract ended, she decided to stay in Spain for a couple of months. The resort was entering its peak season, and she saw an opportunity to earn a good income. She discussed her plan with her Michael, who was supportive and promised to visit her for a few days since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Agnes quickly landed a job as a hostess at an upscale restaurant and renewed her lease. As planned, her boyfriend, Michael, visited her in September. During his visit, they had a great time, planned their upcoming wedding, and picked a destination for their honeymoon. Michael had to return to London after less than a week, leaving Agnes to work in Spain for another month. After that, she planned to visit her relatives in Latvia before flying to England to join her Michael. Unfortunately, these plans never came to fruition. Agnes went to the popular Costa del Sol nightclub with friends on September 6th. Earlier in the day, she had informed Michael of her plans and he approved. Agnes and her friends had a great time at the club, and Agnes even posted some photos on her online profile. She wore a striking mini dress and carried a small white clutch that night. As the night wore on and her friends prepared to leave, Agnes decided to stay a bit longer and then take a taxi home. Her friends didn't worry about her, as she was responsible and hadn't had much to drink. When they said their goodbyes and headed out, Agnes was chatting with a man who had bought her a drink and was trying to get her attention. After that night, Agnes disappeared without a trace. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. No one could recall what time she left the club, who she left with, or where she went afterwards. Agnes failed to show up at work the next day, and attempts to contact her were unsuccessful as her phone was turned off. Her colleagues and friends immediately raised concerns, but the police were slow to respond to the missing persons report. As the day drew to a close, a worried Michael called Agnes's mother to report that he had been unable to reach his fiancée all day, which was unusual. The following day, Agnes's parents and Michael jointly tried to contact the Spanish police to report her disappearance, but they were informed that a missing persons report could only be filed in person by a relative. Undeterred, Michael and Agnes's family booked the next available flight to Marbella. It wasn't until 5 days after Agnieszka's disappearance that her family was able to file a missing persons report. The investigation began with a search of Agnieszka's rented apartment, which appeared to be untouched, as if she had simply stepped out for a short time. Her documents, money, and expensive jewelry were still in place. The refrigerator was stocked with prepared meals, and several outfits were laid out on the bed, suggesting that Agnieszka had been preparing to go out, likely to the club on the night she vanished. To aid in the search, Agnieszka's friends and family distributed flyers with her picture throughout the city, and the media picked up the story, featuring it on TV news programs and the front pages of local newspapers. The police reviewed footage from CCTV cameras inside and outside the entertainment venue, but encountered a setback. The files had already been deleted. However, with the help of specialists, they were able to recover the recordings. One of the restored videos, taken by a camera near the parking lot exit, showed Agnieszka leaving the club around 6 a.m. with a man. It was clear that she did not leave voluntarily. The final footage, which showed Agnieszka alive, was thoroughly examined by experts. However, the more they studied the footage, the more alarming it became. Agnieszka was seen being led by a man to the parking lot, clearly under duress. He had a tight grip on her waist, and Agnieszka looked frightened. She attempted to break free multiple times and appeared to be saying something emotional, but he persisted in leading her to a Mercedes A63 with tinted windows. As he forced Agnieszka into the car, it became clear that another person was already inside. Meanwhile, the first man got into the driver's seat. Agnieszka temporarily managed to open the car door and tried to escape, but he who had been standing next to her, likely the doorman, intervened and pushed her back into the car at the driver's signal. In return for his assistance, the driver appeared to hand the doorman something, presumably a cash reward. Agnieszka's phone was turned off 6 minutes after she got into the car, and it was never turned back on. The vehicle's subsequent movements couldn't be tracked because there were no CCTV cameras along the route. It became clear that the men in the cabin were the last people to see Agnieszka before she went missing. Despite this, the case was shrouded in secrecy from the start. Everyone involved in the investigation signed confidentiality agreements, and information was kept from the press and even Agnieszka's loved ones. For the first few months, Agnieszka's parents and Michael were left in the dark, with only vague updates that the investigation was ongoing and that it was too early to draw conclusions. As time passed without any word from Agnieszka, hope began to dwindle. Agnieszka's fiancé, Michael, periodically gave interviews pleading for help in finding her, but no one ever came forward with information. It wasn't until 6 months later that Agnieszka's relatives were finally shown footage from the club's cameras and given the names of the 3 men who had last been in contact with her. Wesley Capper, the son of a wealthy British millionaire, was identified as he who forcibly removed Agnieszka from a club and pushed her into a car. Wesley Capper was accompanied by his longtime friend, Craig Porter, who had no specific occupation and had previously been on the police's radar. A third man, Cyan Usman, a dark-skinned doorman, was also in the car. Under interrogation, all 3 men claimed they were innocent, stating that Agnieszka had voluntarily gotten into the car. According to Wesley Capper, he and a friend had met Agnieszka at a club and approached her to strike up a conversation. Wesley Capper claimed that Agnieszka was already intoxicated, but this contradicts the testimony of her friends. He also stated that Agnieszka had accepted a drink from him and his friend. Capper then invited Agnieszka to continue the party at his luxurious country home, which she allegedly agreed to. However, Wesley Capper claims that Agnieszka changed her mind once they were in the car and asked to be dropped off in the middle of the road, stating that she would take a cab home. Wesley Capper claimed that he dropped Agnieszka off at her requested location, which was an unlit stretch of road with no CCTV cameras. Craig Porter couldn't confirm or deny Wesley Capper's statement about Agnieszka's presence in their car. According to Porter's own admission, he was also extremely drunk and didn't know how or when Agnieszka got into the vehicle. He fell asleep shortly after leaving the parking lot and only woke up to find Agnes was no longer in the car. The doorman, Sean Usman, confirmed that Agnes was intoxicated, but he couldn't say if she voluntarily got into the car. However, he did say that when the car moved, Agnes opened the door and nearly fell out. The driver then asked him to close the door, for which he received a large tip. When questioned, Sean Usman said he didn't think Agnes's attempt to get out of the car was an escape attempt. In his opinion, she might have accidentally opened the door due to her intoxication. He also noted that Agnes didn't scream or ask for help during the incident. The security footage clearly shows Wesley Capper forcibly leading Agnes to the car, holding her by the waist and wrist. However, Wesley's defense is that Agnes was dizzy and he was only holding her to prevent her from falling. Later in the investigation, another unsettling video came to light, shot in the south of Spain, specifically at the Porta de la Dua in the Seu Grande Marina. The footage was of the luxury yacht belonging to John Capper, a millionaire and the father of one of the suspects. Dated September 10th, just 4 days after Agnes went missing, it showed Wesley Capper and 2 other men boarding the yacht. Notably, they carried a heavy suitcase and what appeared to be a rolled-up carpet. However, when questioned about this footage, Wesley Capper explained that he and his friends had traveled to the yacht simply to have a good time. He claimed the suitcase was packed with their belongings and what seemed to be a carpet was actually bedding. Wesley Capper failed to account for where everything had gone, considering none of these items were seen upon their return. The investigators meticulously searched the yacht and the automobile, only to find nothing of consequence because both vehicles had been thoroughly cleaned, thus destroying any possible DNA evidence. Interestingly, during this exhaustive search, a blonde hair was found in a car trunk, although determining its origin was not feasible as the hair itself had strangely disappeared over the course of the investigation, marking another puzzle within this intriguing case. A few hours after Agnes was last seen in the defendant's car, Wesley Capper made several calls to emergency services, but hung up each time without waiting for an answer. It seemed as though he was afraid or uncertain about what to do. Wesley Capper claimed he was drunk and made the calls randomly. The lawyer for the Agnes family argued that Agnes was likely already dead, and her body was probably at the bottom of the sea, hidden in the suitcase the suspects had brought on board the yacht. He also believed that the case had been intentionally delayed, giving the suspects ample time to destroy any evidence that could prove their guilt. It wasn't until a year and a half after Agnes's disappearance that Wesley Capper, Porter, and Usman were finally brought to trial. They were accused of holding Agnes against her will and forcing her into a car. Unfortunately, due to a lack of evidence, no further charges could be made. This decision outraged Agnes's relatives, but the judge stood firm. In 2019, nearly 5 years after Agnes's disappearance, the 3 men were brought to trial again. Despite the prolonged period, they continued to deny their guilt, claiming that Agnes voluntarily got into the car. The prosecutor argued that the doorman should be considered an accomplice for helping the defendants drive the victim away. The doorman, Usman, could have faced a 5-year prison sentence. Instead, he defended himself, stating that he was a suspect due to his skin color and lack of access to a good lawyer. He claimed that he sent all his earnings to a starving family in Africa. Wesley Capper and lawyers argued that their clients were only guilty of persuading Agnes to get into the car, not forcing her. They believed that Agnes was dropped off on the road as requested, but was possibly kidnapped and killed by someone else while waiting for a cab. The judge's verdict was met with surprise and anger from Agnes's relatives, as none of the defendants received any punishment. Usman was acquitted of all charges. Wesley Capper was given a 2-year sentence for taking advantage of Agnes's intoxication to coax her into his car, and Porter received a 6-month sentence for aiding Wesley Capper's actions. However, they received suspended sentences and did not serve any time in prison. Instead, they paid Agnieszka's family £101,000 in compensation. Agnieszka's family was unhappy with the outcome and decided to appeal. It later came to light that the defendants had both committed further offenses while awaiting the court's decision. Wesley Capper, who was intoxicated by alcohol and drugs at the time, hit and killed a woman with his vehicle and then fled the scene. Meanwhile, Porter and a friend, who were also intoxicated, stole a car after violently assaulting its owner. Wesley Capper received a surprisingly lenient sentence of probation for his serious crime, thanks to his lawyer's skilled defense. As part of his sentence, he paid a substantial amount of compensation to the family of she he had killed in a car accident. In contrast, Porter was not as fortunate and was sent to jail, although the exact length of his sentence is not publicly known. Nearly 7 years after Agnieszka's disappearance, the prime suspect in her case finally faced consequences. However, it wasn't the law that caught up with Wesley Capper, but his own destructive lifestyle. Years of substance abuse took a serious toll on his health. During the -19 pandemic, Capper was hospitalized, and after beginning to recover from the illness, he suffered a stroke. He passed away on July 26, 2021, at the age of 44. At that time, Agnieszka's parents appealed to the court again, but unfortunately, the suspect had since passed away and could no longer face prosecution. Despite this development, the case was still before the Supreme Court, although a new turn of events would arise 9 years later, long after Agnieszka's fate had been presumed, her body never found, alive or dead. Following this, her parents, sister Michael, and their lawyer converged on a plausible theory. It suggested that the perpetrators had likely disposed of Agnieszka's body in a suitcase that was secretly boarded on a yacht, eventually dropped in a distant, undisclosed part of the open ocean. In mid-June, a gardener at the exclusive Lida Golf Club in the Costa del Sol region discovered a mysterious object near the coast while cleaning the area. Upon closer inspection, the object turned out to be an old, badly damaged suitcase. The gardener did not attempt to open it and instead called the police. When law enforcement officers opened the suitcase, they found human remains inside. Further examination revealed that the remains belonged to she, approximately 25 to 35 years old at the time of her death. It was also determined that the suitcase had been submerged in water for around 10 years before washing up on the shore. Based on these findings, the police hypothesized that the remains might belong to Agnieszka, a woman who had gone missing 9 years ago. To confirm this theory, investigators are conducting DNA tests to compare Agnieszka's DNA with the remains found in the suitcase. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachel O'Reilly. Rachel O'Reilly was born in 1974 in County Dublin, Ireland. Her biological parents are unknown, but she was adopted at a young age by Rose and Jim Calley, who raised her along with their 4 other adopted children. Rachel was a responsible and driven child. She excelled in school, played sports, helped with household chores, and never caused any trouble. As she grew up, she became a sociable, open, and exceptionally kind person. She got along with everyone and avoided conflict whenever possible. As a teenager, Rachel was a skilled softball player, participating in numerous competitions and setting local records. Her closest relationship was with her adoptive mother, Rose, with whom she shared all her secrets and stayed in close touch even after she got married and had children of her own. Rachel decided to pursue a degree in marketing from a local university after completing high school. She also landed a job as a salesperson at a city department store and continued to play sports for a local team in her free time. Joe O'Reilly, born in 1972 in County Dublin, Joe grew up in a simple family as the second child of his parents, with an older sister. His parents instilled in him the value of hard work and self-reliance, not spoiling him or his sister. Joe was a tall and athletic boy who enjoyed playing softball. After high school, He chose to study advertising through correspondence and took a job as a manager at a department store. A few months later, Rachel would start working at the same store. Joe was 19 years old when he first met Rachel, who was just 17. He was immediately drawn to her and introduced himself, but despite being charmed by her bright smile and blonde hair, she refused to go on a date with him. Undeterred, Joe began to try to win her over, showering her with compliments and small gifts, such as flowers and chocolates, which he would leave at her workstation in the morning. However, no matter how hard he tried, Rachel remained unimpressed. The entire department store staff was entertained by Joe's attempts to get Rachel's attention, and it even became a running joke. Despite initial challenges, Joe persevered. He made an effort to read Rachel's favorite book, hoping to find common ground for conversation. However, it wasn't until he discovered her passion for softball that he made significant progress. Joe attended one of her games, joined in during practice, and showcased his skills on the field. As a result, the team won, and Rachel was finally impressed by his determination and athletic abilities. She agreed to go on a date with him, and their relationship began to blossom. As they spent more time together, Joe went to great lengths to prove his commitment and affection. He planned a surprise trip to Paris, a city he knew Rachel would love. In a romantic gesture, he proposed to her at the top of the Eiffel Tower. Rachel was overwhelmed by the surprise and happily accepted his proposal. She thought she had found her perfect match, a true prince who would make her happy for the rest of her life. A few years after their wedding, they had 2 sons. They moved to a peaceful and scenic area in Scotland, where they bought a spacious and cozy home, ideal for raising their children. After the birth of their first son, Rachel left her job to focus on taking care of her family. 2 years later, their second son was born, and Rachel dedicated herself to raising their children. Meanwhile, Joe secured a job at an advertising agency, specializing in outdoor advertising, which proved to be a successful career move for him. Those who knew Joe personally described him as a confident, driven, and charming individual. At work, he demonstrated his responsibility, expertise, and attention to detail. As they grew older and started attending kindergarten, Rachel began working as a distributor for a popular cosmetics company and selling household goods to earn extra income. This job allowed her to interact more with her neighbors, who praised her as a wonderful mother and a kind, open person. Meanwhile, Joe became increasingly absent from home, only returning to sleep, shower, and change clothes. He attributed his absence to his demanding work schedule and an upcoming promotion he was eagerly anticipating. Rachel supported Joe as best she could, but as time passed, they started to drift apart, and their family relationships began to deteriorate significantly. A disturbing incident occurred in the summer of 2004 when an anonymous person sent a letter to Child Protective Services, falsely accusing Rachel of being a bad mother who mistreated her sons. In response, a special commission visited their home to investigate the allegations. Although the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing, and relatives and neighbors described Rachel as a loving and caring mother, the malicious letter damaged her reputation. On the morning of Monday, October 4, 2004, the O'Reilly household began as usual. Joe, the father, left for work at dawn while his wife, Rachel, and their sons were still asleep. Throughout the day, Joe tried to contact Rachel by texting and calling her, but she didn't respond. He then called their home phone, but the answering machine picked up, and Joe left a worried message, asking Rachel to call him back as soon as possible. Later that afternoon, Joe received a call from the kindergarten teacher, informing him that Rachel had not arrived to pick up their sons, which was unusual. Joe then called his mother-in-law, Rose, to ask if she knew Rachel's whereabouts. When Rose said she didn't know, Joe asked her to check on their house and see if everything was okay. Meanwhile, Joe went to the kindergarten to pick up the children. When Rose arrived at the house, she found Rachel's car in the yard, indicating that Rachel was home. However, the house was dark and quiet, and Rose's calls went unanswered. As Rose entered the house, she was immediately struck by the scene of chaos before her. Cabinets and drawers were open, with their contents scattered all over the floor, giving the appearance of a robbery. Upon entering the bedroom, Rose's was met with a horrific sight. Rachel lay lifeless on the floor, surrounded by a massive pool of her own blood. The walls, furniture, and even the ceiling were splattered with blood, and Rachel's tangled, bloody hair partially concealed her skull. In some places, the bare bones of her skull were visible. Rose rushed to her daughter, hoping against hope that she was still alive and could be saved. But when she touched Rachel's arm, she felt it was cold and stiff. It was clear that Rachel had been dead for hours, and there was nothing that could be done to help her. Overcome with grief and unable to collect her thoughts, Rose began screaming and calling for help. She then rushed to the phone to dial the police. Her screams alerted the neighbors, one of whom was a doctor. The doctor was the first to examine the body and confirm that Rachel was beyond help. When Joe arrived at the house, he was met with a crowd of people who had already gathered there. Upon learning of his wife's death, he was overcome with grief, screaming and running inside the house, exclaiming that he didn't believe the news. In the bedroom, he became hysterical beside his wife's body, crying and vowing to kill the person responsible for her murder. According to the police officers who responded to the scene, the crime was one of the most brutal they had ever encountered. The victim, Rachel, had been beaten to death with a heavy blunt object with incredible force. It appeared that she had been attacked from behind, as she showed no signs of having tried to resist or fight back. At first, the scene resembled a robbery, but the investigators' instincts suggested that the brutality of the attack indicated a personal motive or intense dislike. However, it was unclear who would have wanted to harm the Rachel, who was a mother of two. The detectives began by interviewing Rachel's family members and neighbors, who all confirmed that she was a friendly person with no known enemies or conflicts. None of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious on the day of the murder. Joe provided an alibi, stating that he was at the bus depot on the other side of town for work, which could be corroborated by a coworker. The scene looked like a robbery, but nothing valuable was taken. A 1,000 euro note was left untouched on the bedside table, and another stash of money was found in a kitchen cupboard, also untouched. A jewelry box on the dressing table was disturbed, but only a pair of chains and earrings were missing, found separately in a drawer. The homeowner reported that a digital camera, silverware, and one of his dumbbells, likely the murder weapon, were missing. The investigation found the situation suspicious. The house was in disarray, and Rachel was brutally murdered, yet only a few items were taken. Joe, answering police questions, was visibly shaken, crying, and feverish. However, one investigator believed that Joe's behavior seemed more like nervous excitement than grief or shock. When asked if his wife might have had an affair, Joe's demeanor changed, and he confidently denied it. He then added that he had not cheated on his wife, but this statement seemed unconvincing. A bag containing stolen items from the house was discovered in the bushes, 2 miles from the crime scene. The bag held a camera, silverware, and a few pieces of jewelry, all of which were on the list of stolen items compiled by Joe. This new evidence led investigators to rule out the possibility of a robbery and reclassify the case as a premeditated murder. As a result, Joe, who had been trying to appear grief-stricken, became the prime suspect. His attempts to convey pain and sorrow seemed insincere, raising suspicions about his involvement in the crime. Joe didn't have an alibi to present, so the detectives had to investigate the details of his day to piece together what happened. According to Joe, he started the morning by stopping at the gym, a routine he followed regularly. The surveillance cameras in the gym's parking lot and inside the gym confirmed his presence. After his gym visit, Joe drove to the office and then headed to a remote bus station in the city to check on the placement of advertisements on buses. A colleague corroborated Joe's account, recalling a phone conversation they had around that time. The investigators then visited Joe's workplace to inspect his computer. This led to a significant discovery. Joe's email contained some suspicious messages that he had partially deleted. Specialists were able to recover the deleted emails, and the police became convinced they were on the right track. Most of the recovered emails were exchanges with Joe's friend and sister, in which he frequently complained about his wife, Rachel, using derogatory language and profanity. Joe's wife had not been attractive to him for a long time, and in fact, he felt a strong sense of disgust towards her. Meanwhile, investigators discovered a suspicious correspondence between Joe and a female colleague named Nikki Pell. Their communication suggested that they were more than just friends and warranted further questioning. Nikki Pell worked at the same advertising company as Joe and was 10 years his senior. Despite their age difference, they had begun an affair. It was unclear when exactly their workplace romance started, but it was evident that Joe spent a significant amount of time with Nikki, often staying late into the evenings and even nights. Joe's wife was unaware of this and was misled into believing that he was busy with work. What was even more alarming was the content of Joe's messages to Nikki, in which he promised that they would soon be together, referring to her as a potential stepmother to his children with his wife, Rachel. Such messages raised suspicions, especially considering that in the event of a divorce, the children would likely remain with their mother. Joe initially denied having an affair, but when faced with irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, he was forced to admit to secretly dating Nikki for some time. Although they had reportedly broken up for over a week before the incident. This revelation raised questions. Following the discovery of the body, the O'Reilly house was sealed off as a crime scene, and no one was allowed to enter while the police conducted a thorough investigation. During this time, Joe stayed with his sister, and the children stayed with their grandparents. At the funeral, Joe was surprisingly calm and appeared to avoid the casket containing his deceased wife's body. When it was his turn to say goodbye, he did so hastily and without emotion. As he left, he appeared unconcerned, saying that the casket could be closed and buried once the family was allowed to return home. When they returned, everything in the house appeared to be in the same condition as the day of the murder, except for the body on the floor. Joe asked his in-laws to accompany him to the scene of the crime, and they agreed, thinking he needed their emotional support. However, as they walked around the room where Rachel had been murdered, Joe began to speculate about the killer's actions. He graphically described the attack, pointing to dried blood spatters and reenacting the blows with his arms. Joe suggested that the perpetrator might have washed his hands and the crime weapon in the bathroom before taking it with him. Although his detailed and unsettling account seemed like an attempt to process his grief, his parents-in-law couldn't shake the feeling that he was reenacting the crime. Rose, in particular, secretly suspected that Joe might have been the one who killed their daughter. Immediately following the funeral, Joe began aggressively seeking media attention. He granted numerous interviews and even invited reporters into his home, providing them with a tour of the crime scene while recounting the events that transpired. 3 weeks after the tragedy, the Rachel loved ones agreed to participate in a television program about the crime. However, while Rachel's parents appeared to be overcome with grief, Joe's behavior on set was remarkably different. He interacted with the makeup team, showing concern for his on-camera appearance, and during breaks, he eagerly accepted and enjoyed the offered snacks and coffee, behaving more like a celebrity than a grieving family member. The police, who were still looking at Joe, decided to follow him and found that from the set he went straight to his mistress Nikki, who spent the night. By that time, the last doubts that he was the killer had already been dispelled, and it remained only to collect irrefutable evidence for the court. collecting evidence proved to be a time-consuming and challenging task. The main piece of evidence, the murder weapon, remained elusive. Despite this, investigators accumulated enough supplementary evidence. Initially, two key witnesses, Nikki and Joe's colleague who corroborated his alibi, faced possible imprisonment for perjury, leading them to recant their earlier statements. Nikki revealed that her relationship with Joe never actually ended, they continued to see each other in secret. Rachel, who discovered their ongoing connection, got into a significant argument with Joe and his wife shortly before the tragedy. In contrast, Joe's colleague, although previously vouching for his whereabouts, could not confidently attest that Joe was at the bus station across town at the time of his wife's murder. He unknowingly corroborated his friend's story at his request, unaware that Joe was a suspect in the crime at the time. Emails retrieved from Joe's computer, in which he made disparaging comments about his wife and planned a future with his mistress and children, were also submitted as evidence in the case. Joe made a deliberate attempt to create an alibi by going to the gym and ensuring he was caught on camera. He then informed his colleagues that he would be unavailable due to a work commitment in another part of the city. However, instead of going to the bus station as claimed, Joe went home, armed himself with a dumbbell, and hid in the bedroom, waiting for his wife to return from taking the children to kindergarten. He launched a surprise attack on her from behind, leaving her no opportunity to defend herself. After committing the crime, Joe, who later admitted his actions, cleaned the blood from himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom next to the bedroom. He then changed his clothes, scattered his belongings around the house to make it appear like a robbery had occurred, and headed to work. While on his way to the office, Joe got rid of the items he had taken, disposed of the bloody clothes and dumbbells, and made several attempts to cover his tracks by calling his wife's phone, sending her messages, and leaving voicemails asking her to call him back. At the office, Joe exhibited unusual behavior, appearing overly excited and showing signs of nervousness, as evident from his slightly shaking hands. Some of his colleagues noticed his unusual behavior and asked if he was okay, but Joe seemed flustered and, instead of responding, quickly retreated to his office. Shortly after, he received a call from the daycare center informing him that no one had picked up their boys. Instead of rushing home, Joe sent his mother-in-law to discover his daughter's disfigured body first. He believed he had covered his tracks and that his guilt would be impossible to prove. However, his desire for fame and public attention ultimately worked against him. Although most of the evidence against Joe was circumstantial, he was not arrested until 2 years after the crime. His guilt was ultimately proven by tracing his movements on the day of the murder, using data from a cell phone he had kept with him. Notably, at the time of the murder, Joe's cell phone signal was tracked to the home, a fact later confirmed by phone records. Furthermore, it was revealed during the trial that the anonymous letter sent to Child Protective Services, which made false accusations against Rachel, was actually written by Joe's mother at his request. Joe's motive for the murder was to gain sole custody of the children in the event of a divorce. To achieve this, he attempted to discredit Rachel by portraying her as an abusive mother. However, social services found no evidence to support these claims, and Joe decided to take more drastic action. Joe showed no remorse in the courtroom, smiling and chatting with his lawyers as if he was confident he would be acquitted. However, in the summer of 2007, the court delivered a guilty verdict and sentenced him to life in prison. Despite the defense team's efforts to appeal the decision, all their attempts were unsuccessful. Interestingly, Joe's relationship with his mistress, Nikki, continued even after his imprisonment. She visited him regularly for many years, but they suddenly lost contact in 2022. Throughout his imprisonment, Joe has maintained his innocence and has been a model inmate, never causing any trouble. He hopes that this good behavior will eventually make him eligible for parole.